Yes, just to kick this off, today we're going to be looking at log analytics and log management through the power of Dynatrace and the power of Davis AI. So looking at how we can do log analytics at petabyte scale ingest and precise root cause analysis. And we've got a really interesting story to sort of back this up as well from Alex here from Storio Group. And also, of course, with the partnership that we have here with AWS. And again, how, of course, Dynatrace, AWS, and of course our customers that we have together work hand in hand. So I'm John Griffiths. I'm the field CTO at Dynatrace, covering primarily Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And Alex?
My name is Alex Hibbett. I'm an engineering director. I'm responsible for the customer platform of Storio Group.
And I'm Frank Schwarzenau. I'm the global lead for the observability use case for AWS partner specialists. And yeah, let you start now.
All right.
Back in a second.
So, as we sort of started on, we'll look at first Dynatrace and AWS and that partnership together and how we sort of enable customers to innovate, move faster, and of course, reduce their mean time to resolution and resolving incidents. We'll then move on to Alex with the interesting story around Storio Group's journey with log analytics and how they've made massive changes around that. And then finally, touching on actually modern log management, the sort of things that you can learn from that, how we can look at significant cost savings, a lot of the time, the sort of 60 to 70% reduction in log spend, while still getting even more significant value out of that. So, start with Dynatrace. How many of you here, let's say, are a customer of Dynatrace? Okay, a reasonable amount. How many of you here work for a competitor of Dynatrace? No? Oh, there's a couple. Security? No. It's okay. Now, as a whole, basically Dynatrace, for those that aren't fully aware, focuses on observability and security with AI at its core. Now, what that ends up meaning is that all data, all signals, whether that's logs, whether that's metrics, traces, whether that's from your infrastructure, your applications, the real users, your AI agents or LLMs, whatever it may be, getting all of that deep insight in context. And the context is key because whenever you look at things like automation or AI, good quality data is core to that. Rubbish data, rubbish output. Good quality data obviously allows you to have far better outputs associated with that. Now, again, when you start to make decisions and data-driven decisions, again, data, context, and especially the domain context that comes into that can be very crucial to this. So really, Dynatrace is providing that deep insight in the context of your domain, in the context of wherever it's grabbing that information from, so that, as you can see here, we like to say that will help you understand your business like never before. Now, again, obviously, a few quick slides first, but we are obviously leading in this market. As you can see here, this is the Gartner Magic Quadrant, where the most recent one, we've been in the highest ability to execute and ranked #1 in 4 of the 6 critical capabilities. And finally on there, as you can see, we are the only vendor to have been named in every single Gartner Magic Quadrant for APM and observability since its inception. So we've been in that leader quadrant in every single one. So that's 15 years of staying in that leader quadrant. Again, innovation and continuously striving forwards is obviously key to that. And of course, it's not just the analyst side of things. We have customers from every single industry. Whether that's, as you can see here, things like aviation, banking, retail, utilities, all across the board, we have customers in every single industry and across every single continent. So again, really driving that platform faster. Obviously, we are taking the insights from our customers, expanding, obviously, on our awareness and ensuring that we are innovating to keep up and match what our customers actually require. Oh, Frank?
That's my cue. So, as I said before, my job at AWS is essentially just focusing on the AWS observability use case and working with both ISVs and SI partners. And we have about 120,000 partners in our network. And of those 120,000 partners, we have about 200 in our cloud operations competency, which includes observability. And there's actually just 8 ISV observability partners that are specialists or deemed specialists from AWS and got the stamp of approval to be that observability partner. So the 10 years of partnership is a great number, but it's more important to focus on how much Dynatrace is leaning in with AWS and with the customers. And that leaning in is, of course, represented by all of these competencies that are achieved in the bottom here, which essentially are the stamp of approval from AWS, where Dynatrace jumps through a lot of hoops that we put out there in order for you as a customer to be able to say, like, wow, Dynatrace, they really know what they're doing around all of these use cases. But one exciting part, of course, is how much Dynatrace is leaning in on the AI use case, and is launching on a monthly basis something like all of the integrations with Bedrock Agent Core, for instance, for end-to-end observability for your agents, or even Kiro integrations for AI-assisted troubleshooting through your IDE. But also what's really important, and I think what I always come across is there's very few customers that complain about Dynatrace, which is really nice to see, because I think from my perspective, and I see a lot of different partner engagements and a lot of different customer engagements with our partners, Dynatrace is really kind of moving the needle and really kind of defining of what it means to be customer obsessed, what it means to be aligned with AWS, and provide that value throughout, not just make migration easy, but then also how does the customer get value out of using both AWS in the combination with Dynatrace afterwards. One of the cool things is also the native integrations. This is probably way over 100 at this point because the slide is a few weeks old. But we see Dynatrace really leaning in on launching services together with us and being launch partner, be beta customers for stuff that you don't even know that's around the corner yet, but really kind of being tied at the hip. And of course, you were Global Partner of the Year this year, 2025. You were Technology Partner of the Year in EMEA last year. So I think there's a big recognition from both the AWS environment as well as from our customers. Dynatrace leans in, and I can talk about each of these pillars. So I hope everybody's familiar with these pillars from the well-architected framework. But of course, you have resilience, you have resource optimization, you have cost optimization, you have performance optimization, and SLA management, and so on. But the more important fact about this slide is that Dynatrace thinks about the impact to the customer very much aligned with how AWS thinks about how to have impact with the customer. So that it's going to be easy for all of us to work together and talk around the same kind of core concepts and core guiding principles. I talked about AI before and how much Dynatrace is leaning into these integrations. This number here of 500 implementations is actually just from the AI use case. So we've already have 500 wins that we have together where Dynatrace has enabled customers to really leverage the best of AWS and Dynatrace to adopt the AI use cases. And this is around or on all different kind of layers, right? So I think everybody here in the room is pretty familiar of how to do observability or how observability should be done on the application layer, and probably also pretty familiar with how it should be done on the infrastructure layer. But I think the important part is sort of the wedge in between, on the orchestration level where you have prompt observability, or on the semantic layer where you really can look at how biased the inputs and the outputs are when you interact with your AI applications. And then, of course, model health. How do you continuously monitor the health of your models that you use for your applications? And then, I mentioned this already, Dynatrace launches a lot of services with us. And I'm always happy when we're about to launch another service and the Dynatrace CTO is putting up their hand and is like, we would like to test it. I'm like, perfect. So that's happening continuously, and it's a real joy to see how much you guys are leaning in on these things and giving us feedback as well and sort of co-innovate together in order to make this easy for our customers. Speaking of customers, this is just a couple of metrics, and it's quite interesting when I kind of dove deep on this one. And essentially, this is all working backwards to money, right? So if you're reducing this time spent on your resolutions, if you're actually reducing the overall number of incidents or major incidents, and if you just have faster issue resolvents and higher uptime, in the end of the day, all of this is boiling down to customer happiness and money. And this is just some really, really impressive numbers. And we're glad that we're in this together. And I can continue talking about how much customer impact we have, but we have a customer here that we're both partnering with. Alex, if you want to come up and maybe tell your story.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Frank. So, who here has heard of the 3 pillars of observability? Bit of an outdated term now, but just a quick show of hands. Yep, a few of you. I'm not going to talk about those 3 pillars of observability. Instead, I'm going to talk about an alternative 3 pillars of observability. And these have come out of our adoption journey with Dynatrace. I say adoption, it's in fact a re-adoption because we'd worked with Dynatrace in a previous iteration before. I'm willing to bet most of you have never heard of Storio Group, though. So Storio Group are Europe's biggest photo gifting company by revenue. We operate in about a dozen countries under 8 different brands, some of which you may have heard of. Albelly, Photobox, Hoffman, Poster XXL. We serve over 7 million customers a year, and in 2022, we delivered over 10 million orders. And we've been around for quite a long while, but not in the skies. Our oldest brand is Hoffman, and that's been in the Spanish market for over 100 years now, so we've got some serious history. But as Storio Group, we've only came together in 2021 as a merger of 2 different businesses. Albelly, who were based in the Netherlands, and Photobox, who are a group based in the UK. When we joined together, we had a massive challenge. Immediately post-merger, we looked around our ecosystem, and we had something like 5 different technology platforms providing, largely speaking, the same customer experience, selling photo gifts to end users. Any organization looking to innovate and make change cannot do so when they've got to do things 5 times to roll out 1 feature. So we really had a huge call to action there, and that call to action was, how do we move into 1 singular platform? We also had huge scale to deal with. Across all of those platforms, we had over 11 petabytes worth of customer data. That's customer photos, or memories, as we like to refer to them. We really needed to go on a massively imperative journey to reduce the duplication we had down from those 5 platforms to 1 singular platform. And that journey took up 2.5 years, that first 2.5 years of our journey together. An exclusive focus, exclusive and probably ruthless focus. When we got to the final point of having 1 singular platform, we took a breath for a moment and looked around and realized that we had made many, many trade-offs, as you have to do when you're on a journey of such complexity and such pressure. We previously had a really mature observability posture when we were the Photobox half of the organization. And the Albelly half of the organization had a bit of a different strategy. And when we took a moment and we had a look, we said, there are some things missing here. We had a platform that was strongly human-heavy. It was very, very log-centric. And with that, we looked at our MTTR and our MTTD, 2 core metrics, and realized that they were trending in a direction that we did not like. MTTR was going massively up, and simultaneously, the number of incidents we were tracking was dropping. To me, that meant that we were losing track of what was happening on our platform. We were not observing as much as we had previously been in our Photobox iteration. To give you an example, Black Sunday, as we like to call it, which is yesterday, the biggest trading day of the year for photo gifting companies, we were looking at engineers manually trying to correlate performance data and understand what was going wrong across 1.1 billion individual log lines. Humans looking at that much data are going to miss not just 1 thing, not just 10 things, but hundreds of things. And it was intensely resource intensive in terms of the computational power needed and the human power needed. and it was fundamentally not solving the problem we had. The challenge with this was it created a massive business risk for us. Like many businesses, Black Friday through to the holiday season is a hugely important period for us. Across those 6 weeks, an outage would have cost us something like, at any random point it hit, at least $274,000. But during our peak hours, yesterday, as I was flying over here, I was watching the numbers come in. We trade up to €1.5 million an hour. That's a huge number. Bearing in mind that an incident takes, on average, when we were looking at our observability adoption, an hour and a half to resolve, you're talking about way over €2 million worth of trading suddenly blown up by an incident. That huge risk meant that this became a massive imperative to the business. We needed to reorient what we were doing and make sure we became the first to know when trouble was brewing. So this brings me on to our first pillar, the culture pillar. The core problem we had, if you remember a minute ago, was that we had engineers who fundamentally were looking at logs to work out when things were going wrong. What that meant was our engineers couldn't answer the meaningful question. What broke? Why did it break? And how do we fix it? And one of the biggest challenges we found was that was in fact a mindset that many of our engineers did not understand was a problem. They thought that this was actually quite a good way of operating. They built these amazingly huge Elasticsearch clusters and then OpenSearch clusters, which are great for sorting through tons of information. But when you're trying to manually read all of that information, you're going to miss things. We also had a challenge around how do we deliver meaningful change to that culture. Our Anglo-Dutch engineering organisation had a strong sense of its own identity and was very proud, quite rightly, of what they had built out in terms of the technology platform. And what that meant was people like me couldn't wander in and say, oh, this is rubbish. I would have lost all credibility by doing that. It would have been interpreted as top-down. So what we needed to do was take our engineers on a journey, something that we've jokingly started referring to as the 12-step program of observability. First of all, we needed to help them understand they had a problem. It wasn't just me wandering along saying that this is rubbish. Each engineer needed to look at the situation they had and say, this is something that we can make better. And then we had to help them become part of the solution. So let's talk about how we got there. First thing we did was we built out a small working group of 5 influential engineers across the organization who were strong advocates that we did not have a problem, the actual people we wanted to persuade. We asked them to start looking across the market, understanding what industry text, industry research looked like, doing some internal surveys, and looking at reports like Gartner and Forrester to understand what the modern world of observability looked like. And then we asked them to translate all of that data into a maturity model. This maturity model, rather handily, aligns quite nicely with Dynatrace's maturity model. It allowed our teams to grade where they were in observability, but with a particular Storio flavor to it. It was quite quick to identify that we were operating around the level 1, level 2 position, that monitoring to base level observability space, when in fact our desire was to be way up to the level 3, if not the level 4 place, in that causal observability and proactive observability space. It also meant that by building this piece out, we had a framework, we had a direction, we knew we wanted to get to that level 4 position, but we knew that we were going to have to go through level 2 and level 3 to get there. So we suddenly had a clear direction to that North Star. This brings me on to our technology solve. So I mentioned we were shipping 1.1 billion logs a day. That was largely coming from a containerized workload. We use ECS as our container orchestration platform. It's a fairly straightforward solve when you're looking at shipping logs from that solution. AWS provides a product called Firelens, which is a fantastic sidecar to your ECS stacks. It can simply take your existing logs and it outputs them using FluentBit as a protocol. That can be ingested directly by an active gate, which is Dynatrace's technology for routing metrics, logs, and other pieces into their ecosystem. And then from there, it can be fed into Grail, which is Dynatrace's unified data lakehouse. Try saying that after a drink or two. We also had quite a lot of workload in Lambda. About 40% of our workload lives in the Lambda ecosystem. Again, quite a straightforward solve. CloudWatch log groups can be subscribed into a Kinesis Firehose, and then that can be taken off to Open Pipeline. Again, a Dynatrace technology for pulling material in and doing transforms on it. That let us do some pre-processing and then load that into Grail. So we've now got all of our logs from our ECS workload and all of our logs from our Lambda workload flowing nicely into Dynatrace. Last step was our more legacy EC2 workload. We already had an in-place OTel implementation for that, and again, that was a very straightforward solve. We were able to ship all of that OTel data, logs, and the traces that we had present over into Dynatrace, directly into Dynatrace's API, and now we've got all of our 1.1 billion logs in one singular clear platform. Simple, right? This brings us on to pillar number 2. Once we got there, we started putting our logs into context, and we immediately started seeing value from the Dynatrace platform. We were suddenly seeing events happening on our platform being correlated together in an auto-magic way. Brilliant if you bear in mind pastly we've been doing that using humans and saying, well, this log and this log over here correlate. We're getting that correlation out of the box, and we're beginning to understand what's going on. But it also exposed to us that we were often using the wrong signal bearer, in this particular case logs, in situations where something like another signal bearer would be a better fit. A great example is trying to piece together elements from a set of calls using logs, when in fact in reality you may be able to display that better using traces. Once we had those logs in context, we could start saying, right, these are the places in our ecosystem where this signal does not fit. Let's replace it with a different signal. Let's replace this one with some traces. Let's replace these ones with some metrics. And we started to get a richer experience, as well as simultaneously decreasing our log volume. And we started dropping that 1.1 billion down into the several hundred millions and so on downwards. We also started being able to visualize for the first time in a visual way these connections between our distributed services. So no longer was each individual distributed service an isolated little monolith sat there doing its own thing. We could see those calls propagating from service to service. This set ourselves up with massive success. We had this foundation of logs, but we knew that we would have to build on it. And we consciously went out and made sure that that foundation of logs was not our end state. For us, this meant that data unification, as we like to call it, moving all of our data into one place and then picking out the right signals, was a non-negotiable. If we wanted to meaningfully decrease our MTTD and our MTTR, we had to go on this journey. Let's talk about AI. So, as we heard earlier, AI is a core part of the Dynatrace platform. Even with our signals now getting into the millions rather than the billions territory, and with all of our noise filtered out and using the correct bearers, this would have still been an impossible task to look at manually using humans. We'd known that from day one. We thought it would be a Sisyphean task. We would be pushing that rock up a hill every day as we worked through our peak trading period. We knew that for any system at scale to work, we needed automation. And that's what the combination of predictive and causal AI that is present within Dynatrace, the Davis ecosystem, brought to us. We started to see predictive bringing in auto baselining. So we were no longer having to work out what our signals looked like from a normal position, set up manual thresholds, et cetera, et cetera. That just happened magically. We also saw causal AI starting to understand the interconnected web of services we have. And we've got quite a few microservices within our ecosystem, over 200. Manually building out a web of how all these services talk to one another would have been an impossible task, but the automated nature of Dynatrace and Davis operating started connecting all of these services together fantastically. We made a conscious decision to stop manually setting up thresholds and alerts and everything else, and instead focus on making the best out of Davis and the problem cards we could do, because we knew that that would be the most impactful thing in our MTTD. To give you an example of this, yesterday at around about 8 p.m. European time, we had what would have been 3 severity 1 incidents start to emerge on our platform. Things we'd not considered. We had no, as a result of having not considered them, no ability to have instrumented and consciously set up thresholds for checking on these things so as we could have been proactive about it. But Davis was able to spot them coming, start raising performance challenges around a set of services, and we averted 3 individual incidents. Each one of those incidents alone would have been a €1.5 million outage. So in one single fell swoop, the Dynatrace platform and Davis identified over €4.5 million worth of savings to us effectively. I'm going to talk you through a scenario we had a little while ago that also brings some light to this. As you may know, in Europe, each country has different territories and different VAT rates that apply to it, in particular when you're doing territory-to-territory transactions. We store all of that data in a giant DynamoDB table. Not the most elegant of solutions, but we had to accept imperfections as we went on our platform journey. There is also no update method nor any validation in place for that particular DynamoDB table. Again, hold my hands up, not best engineering practice. One of our product managers was meaningfully applying some updates to our tax rates. But unfortunately, a bit of finger trouble crept in, and she managed to malform one of the tax rates for our German markets. Davis immediately started detecting an increase in failures of calls to that DynamoDB table, and was even able to identify the lines in that DynamoDB table that were causing the failure. We'd just been through a fairly substantial reorganization, and the team who actually owned that service had only been owning it for the spell of 2 weeks. But they were guided exactly where the problem lay. They understood very immediately it was related to this DynamoDB table and a particular change that had happened within the last 20 minutes, and they were able to roll back using point-in-time recovery to a period before that change had been made and restore service within 20 minutes. Bear in mind, we'd done nothing to build out alerting for this particular scenario. So this was all automation firing off the back and building out the meaningful impact that we needed to see to prevent any impact happening to our customers. We were able to solve this problem within 20 minutes, and we were really, really glad of the investment that we'd made in this space. There were challenges, though. We didn't always have some smooth sailing. We realized that our existing OTel implementation combined with Dynatrace left some things to be desired, in particular around the front-end to back-end space. That mixed OTel and native ecosystem is a super hard problem to solve for. We also found that some of our engineers who were still in that old school mindset of wanting to look at logs and nothing else really struggled with our new mindset. To this day, I have 2 engineers who have differing views on the value of logs versus other signals in our ecosystem. Each is right and each is valid, but as we look to move things forward, the opportunity to use other signals is one that I think is really, really valuable. And lastly, we needed a major time-bound event to really bring our organization aligned around that single goal. For us, it's our peak trading period, this run-up to the Black Friday weekend and then the run-up to the holiday period. It laser-focused everybody in on making a meaningful change, and we've seen a massive acceleration over these last couple of months since I started writing these slides to getting to a point of having massively great observability coverage. So let me talk about some of our key takeaways. First of all, our change had to be culture first, code second. Leading with the culture piece is what has enabled us to be powerful in our change. If we'd have tried to introduce a technology solution or a process-driven solution first, we would have failed on this journey. We had to change our culture before we could meaningfully make improvement. We also had to embrace the idea of using other signals. If we only stuck with our logs world, we would be having a better experience, but we would be missing so much value that a modern observability platform provides. And that really, when you get to a certain scale, you need to use AI. You can no longer rely on the humans in your organization to do the great job that they have done, because there will be so much data, even with the best will in the world, they will not be able to keep up. AI is essential to enable engineering productivity. You do not want your engineers spending their time reading logs. You want them there writing code. And for that, you need AI to help you with that problem of analysis. Okay, I think I am handing back over to John now.
Thank you, Alex. So hopefully you all found that very interesting. It was a very good story and obviously some very good examples about how log analytics and the wider sort of observability ecosystem can empower things if done in the right way. Now, what we want to sort of start delving into and looking at a little bit more here, so I just realized there's a squeaky floorboard here, is the traditional log management side of things really needs reinvention. It doesn't work in the way that it needs to nowadays. Things are scaling too much, the ecosystem getting too complex, and the more and more complex your ecosystems get, the more data they emit. And obviously, Alex touched on various of these points here, but obviously some of them with things like inflated costs, you're having that incredible amount of technical debt with these different traditional log management tooling that's out there, not just in terms of things like licensing, but more in terms of things like management and maintenance, whether that's off the platforms themselves or whether that's the tens of thousands of dashboards that you're potentially setting up and looking at, and obviously the thousands of alerts that effectively create the alert storms that you were talking about there as well. Now, with all of that, it then comes on to that correlation, that manual correlation that you're having to do to connect these different siloed signals from different tools to bring those things together to try and work out where that root cause is. And again, that of course has that knock-on impact to a worse mean time to resolution, and overall worse collaboration that's taking place between the different teams because everybody has their own source of truth. And finally, of course, that brings you onto the high complexity side, because overall, the traditional log management tooling obviously has been around for a very long space of time. It is built in reality for the past. It doesn't scale in the way that is needed for the current world with microservices, with AI agents and so on, where it is dynamic, it is massively scalable, and it is cloud native. Because with all of those, you need to understand how they relate. You need to understand all the different signals, and unfortunately, logs by itself isn't effective. Logs as part of a much wider piece with all of the other signals is where things can be most effectively used. So when you bring those things together, you can start to use the appropriate signals for their appropriate means and utilize them all in the right way. So with Dynatrace, what we're trying to do is help you scale that cost effectively, to unify and contextualize all that data, whether that's the log data with the topology, with the metrics, the events, again, whether that's the security side of things as well, bringing everything together so you can understand that all in a single place. But more importantly, to enable that proactiveness, enable AI-driven decisions to be made and automation to take place. So really, what we're looking at here is that we all know that the applications, your cloud environments and so on are getting bigger and more complex. But with that explosion of data, with the petabytes of logs, metrics, traces, and so on, it then starts to be a question of what can you do with it? Where is the power with that? And with automation and AI, it's really trying to utilize that data not as effectively noise or a burden of you having to work on all of that to understand what's going wrong and so on, but actually trying to drive automation around it, actually trying to drive preventative operations, empower your teams with the automation on the back of that, so that really you can turn your data, your petabytes and petabytes of information, really into a business advantage, a competitive advantage. And so when we're trying to unify this data across the board, unify the logs with the rest of the observability signals, with Dynatrace, we obviously try and make that as simple and as automated as possible. One of our primary ways, of course, is our Dynatrace One agent, which will automatically detect the logs that your, say, operating systems and applications and so on are writing out, be able to automatically ingest those. But of course, it's not just places you've got one agent. Maybe you've got OpenTelemetry and you've got your OpenTelemetry logs coming in. Maybe you've got log shippers like FluentBit and FluentD and so on. And bringing all that information in whichever way is relevant. And of course, the core one here as well being that direct integration with AWS. Getting all that log information from AWS through the Firehose. So again, you can understand and bring the data in no matter where it's sitting. And again, between a combination of your cloud estates and your on-premise. So really you are getting that unified view. Now, what we're then doing is we're effectively storing that in our central storage, which we call Grail. So that's effectively a specifically built for observability data lakehouse. And this does allow you to ingest over a petabyte of information every single day into your environments and have that full power. Now, what you're able to do with this, as I said, is ensure that all data is stored in there. Whether that's your logs, metrics, traces, real user monitoring, whatever it may be, all stored in context of one another. Whether it's your log records and your traces, we know exactly which trace has written which log record. So you're not having to look through log files and just look at endless log files, not knowing what connects to what. You know exactly which log record was written by which trace, which was connected to which user in their browser or mobile app. And we're trying to do this, as I said, in the most automated way possible, and giving you as much access as possible as well. So there's no data storage tiers for you to manage. There's no hot and cold storage. There's no rehydration of data. You can parse literally the data on read. So there's no semantics that you have to previously set up. There's no indexing and so on and so forth that you have to set up beforehand. You can parse that on read. And what that ends up meaning is that no matter your question, no matter what it is, no matter whether you've thought of it beforehand, you can always ask that question. You don't have to rehydrate data. You don't have to index data in appropriate ways to ask those queries. You can ask whatever you want because you can parse it on read in near real time. So really have a responsive query even when you are looking at your terabytes or petabytes of information. And as you can see here, we are able to do that at that low ingest cost and retention and still be able to retain data up to 10 years. All of that types of data you can retain up to 10 years. So whether that's for regulatory standpoints, with things like obviously some of the AI regulations that have been coming out across the world, and obviously some of the financial services, especially regulations, there is a lot of areas where things like your audit logs or your generative AI connections of your inputs and outputs and so on, understanding those and storing those may be needed for that space of time. And again, may be quite effective and useful. But what do we do with all that data? Once it's there, it's not just about being able to view it and show it on dashboards. Really, this is where the power of the AI really comes in. So what we're looking at here is AI is built into Dynatrace at its core and has been from the beginning. And we are automatically mapping out all of that topology information. We're automatically mapping out all your different services and dependencies and everything together. And all of those telemetry signals are all mapped against those topology components as well. Now what this means is Dynatrace is then able to, on top of all of that, automatically baseline and dynamically baseline as well, full understanding to automatically detect problems that are taking place. Because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. So you can't be setting up or needing to set up alerts for every single thing that could possibly go wrong. You need to just be told when something goes wrong. And then on top of that, because of that accuracy of the data, because of that contextualization, that domain level insights, we're also able to provide precise root cause analysis. So effectively doing fault tree style analysis so that you are able to get accurate root cause analysis rather than effectively trying to correlate different events together. Now what this means is you're not getting the alert storms, you're getting the full insights you need, you're getting straight to the pinpoint to be able to resolve those things, but you're also able to prioritize these on business impact. How many users are impacted? How many business flows or critical business services are actually impacted by this problem? And because you've got accurate root cause, it also means you can do self-healing. The issue with self-healing on, let's say, general correlation is always that with the inherent false positives that come in, if you try and automate or remediate on a false positive, you're going to make the situation a lot worse. Most of the time, you'll scale out your AWS instances and give AWS a lot of money to pay for that. But overall, it could be a matter that you're restarting services that didn't need restarting. It could mean all sorts of different things where, at the end of the day, your customers are getting a worse scenario, and probably your costs are also increasing too. If you know exactly what went wrong, you can fix the root cause rather than trying to fix the various symptoms that often end up bubbling up in these alert storms. And as you'll see through these as well, there is an example here of a problem taking place where there is a failure rate increase. Now, with this, we are able to have the Davis AI, the generative AI part, the Davis Copilot, actually explain to you what happened as part of that problem. So it's not just a matter of giving you all this technical information and you working out what it is. You're actually getting a summary of that problem. What happened, what took place, why did it take place, and an actionable set of steps to actually go ahead and remediate that, some suggestions on how to remediate that. Now, what that means, of course, is that you don't have to go and make those reports quickly when when a major incident happens. You've got that natural language interpretation that can easily be put out so that management and whoever else is aware of what's going on. It also allows you to obviously focus on the right areas in the right places to delve into that. Now, in this case, it was a recent deployment. And so the suggestions here is basically looking at reviewing the error logs and various things like that. But what it's then able to do with that is, because we've got that direct access to the logs, we know exactly which logs are relevant to that problem. It's not, here's every log that's relevant to these servers. It is exactly the logs that are relevant to this problem, the logs that were specifically part of that trace. Because the thing that you'll often have is you may look at a log file that you know is relevant, lots of error messages in there. But which ones are actually relevant to the transactions that are failing, that are actually having an issue? Because error logs happen all the time. And quite often, you can get that mismatching of, there are error logs, I'm assuming that they're going to be relevant to the problem that I'm looking at. And in many times, it's not, and it leads you down the wrong sort of rabbit hole as such. Now, what we can effectively do with that, though, is, as I said, you've got the visibility into all of the logs that are taking place as part of that problem. And we can start to also explain those logs as well. So again, having Dynatrace automatically tell you what that log record actually means. I'm sure all of you have seen log lines before. They vary massively. Some of them are the messiest things possible. But it is able to extract out all of the relevant information that's useful, break it all down for you, so you haven't had to pre-parse it and pre-configure it and whatever else it may be. You're able to be told exactly what the key information is, what the possible root cause is for that, and of course, any actionable steps to remediate the specifics of that, because this is where logs are really good. They are good at providing context. They're not very good from an observability point of view of creating alerts and creating problems, because there is so much noise in logs, but they are very good at providing context and providing you good insights to actually go ahead and start remediation. And finally, on this piece as well, the other thing that Dynatrace is doing is we're also providing this idea of troubleshooting guides. So you can go ahead and you can create a troubleshooting guide based on that problem. Obviously, you do all your inputs and your queries and whatever else it may be. But the benefit of what's taking place on this is that when you have a problem that occurs in the future that is similar, Dynatrace will automatically recommend the previous troubleshooting guide that you created, because it's looking at the similarity of those problems and basically providing you with the previous troubleshooting guide, so you're not having to repeat those steps. Again, it's really, as I said, trying to maximize automation wherever possible, trying to reduce that manual effort, that time it takes you to resolve incidents, and so you can get to the root cause and resolve it as quickly as possible. But it's not just about fighting those fires. You also want to look at, of course, predicting and preventing those fires from taking place in the first place. So when we look at Dynatrace's predictive AI, it can forecast on any time series data at all that Dynatrace has. That includes logs. So you can literally do prediction based on your log records directly. Now, what this means is you can start to understand if things are trending in the wrong direction, and you can start to fix issues before they actually have any impact to your end users. Now, we can effectively start to drive automation based on that from the various logs and events and so on. So if Dynatrace detects, in this case, that there's S3 buckets that are open to the public internet, we can, of course, automatically remediate that. We can use AWS's action APIs effectively to auto-remediate and change those S3 buckets so that you can prevent that sensitive data before it ever gets leaked. And we can also do things like proactively scaling. Whether you're scaling up to increase capacity of your disk, your memory, your CPU, whatever it may be, or if the logs are indicating that there's a business-specific problem or errors that are taking place due to maybe it's resource saturation or something else. We can start to, again, auto-remediate, auto-optimize, and auto-improve what is taking place as part of this, and overall drive this automation and predictive insights to really provide the best for you to prevent those fires from taking place in the first place. And overall, what we're getting to here is that obviously logs quite often are very technical, utilized for a lot of different things, but one of the things we are seeing a lot more power and a lot more benefit with logs is because they have so much rich context and so much rich information, they're quite often powerful from a business data perspective. And the ability to have that information directly connected to your IT information is also very powerful. Because, of course, it means that you can start to understand, like Alex was talking about earlier, about how you can understand the revenue impact of these incidents or problems that are taking place. You can start to understand in real time that actual visibility to understand your entire end-to-end processes, your end-to-end journeys that customers go through and where that impact is taking place, where you're having these significant issues and so on. And this has all been provided because, as I said, all this information is being topology mapped. All this information is being stored in context so that everything is relatable and everything is understood within its domain. Now, overall, we're also obviously trying to really drive towards that proactive AWS operations. So, as mentioned earlier, we've got that direct AWS integration, which allows us to easily capture all of the key AWS telemetry information. Now, we're also able to leverage all of those cloud tags. So bringing in your actual cloud tagging strategy directly into the Dynatrace platform so that you're not having to recreate, you're not having to build new tagging strategies and provide additional complexity. We can inherit the tagging strategy you've already got in your cloud and bring it directly into Dynatrace. So again, whether you want to go and look at a log or a trace or a metric, we're literally pushing those cloud tags to the actual signals that are actually taking place. So again, you can query, filter, do whatever you want with that information. And again, our AI can obviously utilize all that information as well so that we can ensure that you've got that deep insights into your AWS estate for obviously these key three areas. So whether that is the sort of auto-prevention side of things, so whether that's things like capacity planning and forecasting of the events, whether it's things like auto-remediation, with the root cause analysis and obviously putting out those fires before they hopefully impact any of your users, or whether it's auto-optimization, where we are looking at resource optimization, we are looking at identifying misconfigurations and improvements that can be made. And I think it's always interesting to see, especially when you start to get down the route of the AI and the auto-optimization side, is where the human oversight comes into these things. Because a lot of the time, things like auto-remediation aren't too difficult, whether it's scaling things out, spinning up boxes, changing configuration, or whatever it may be. But when you start to get around optimization, you have to have goals. You have to have insights provided by a human. Because of course, if you just basically give an AI, I want to make this as performant as possible, it's going to cost a lot of money because it's going to obviously scale out everything. But if you're going to, obviously go the other way and go, oh, I want to make it as secure as possible, it'll probably just switch it all off. So again, you need to give it the realms, the goals, the boundaries that are associated with that, and optimization is that balance. And so that's always, I find, quite an interesting one to look at from an AI perspective. So to sort of finish off and summarize, really Dynatrace is trying to help you scale your log management cost effectively and unify and contextualize all of that information, all of the log information with all of the other signals that exist. And really to enable that proactive and AI-driven insights for you to take place. Now, not only does this help reduce your mean time to resolution, but it also helps you track end-to-end business journeys and obviously make those data-driven business decisions that we were talking about before as well. And obviously with AWS, we can proactively help with the AWS operations to do the auto-remediation, the auto-prevention, and auto-optimization. So I'm going to invite Frank and Alex back up on stage. We're going to have a quick sort of Q&A sort of style of things to finish this off.
Awesome. If you want to sit down, I'm going to do rapid fire because we only have a couple of minutes left. Awesome. All right. I always like this kind of Q&A setup because it's a little bit more, less structured. And if there's any questions that you really need to be answered, you can just scream them in. But unfortunately, we don't have a mic to go around. But I have a couple here that I wanted to clarify. And the first one is on culture. That was a big thing of one of your three pillars. And I just wanted to know, have you ever, how did you actually manage that? Because culture is a beautiful thing, but it's also really difficult to impact and make changes on. And how did you manage that transition?
So for us, I think, first of all, it was identifying the right set of people who could be our culture carriers across the organization and work out how we could meaningfully engage them in the process of looking at the observability problem and working out how we could move forward. And then it was a question of how do we meaningfully carry that message out to the rest of our organization. We did that through things like Dynatrace, through support through AWS, running game days in combination with Dynatrace, and through sharing internal documentation, things like this maturity model that you saw earlier. It's hard though. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. As much as you want to build out strategies that drive observability and other pieces, unless you pay attention to that cultural piece, you will fail.
How long did it take you?
Oh, it was a good year-long process, to be honest.
Yeah. And did Dynatrace somehow contribute to making it a little easier?
Massively. So I mentioned Dynaday. This is a day that hopefully you're not all about to ask Dynatrace to provide, but I think they will be in certain cases, where some of the Dynatrace account team come out, spend some time with your engineers, work out what their challenges are, work out what the levers are to pull, and help them understand what great can look like from an observability position. Things like the Dynatrace AWS game day, incredibly powerful. Running a game day is a huge thing. It's great fun. It's really engaging for our engineering community. And to work with two partners like Dynatrace and AWS, absolutely fantastic.
Nice. And are you running a lot of these? Are you?
Quite a few, to be fair.
Yeah.
I mean, it does vary customer by customer. I think every customer is different, and where the cultural changes are needed also vary as well. I think overall, a lot of it is about, I guess, enablement and involvement. So the more that people can be involved, the more people can be enabled, the easier that is. Because obviously Alex talked about through the presentation, things like the return on investment was easy and sort of insane how much could be sort of returned very quickly. But it's all about, how much is it of a benefit to that individual? And so how do we bring them in? Sometimes it is through the AWS game days and things like that, where sometimes it is, to an extent, a more playful, fun thing to do to bring that in. But they all have a level of enablement sort of as part of that.
Yeah, and I think there's always so many little pockets of knowledge that how you can actually be enabled. And everybody that's in the audience is very much leaned in, and you're here, and but how this is being translated to the larger organizations that are behind you, I think that's always nice to kind of get the best practices from.
I think that's exactly why we started with detractors, people who didn't believe that they had an observability problem, because they were the most powerful group to convince. Once you get those people aligned, you can bring the rest of the organization along.
Yeah.
Those people who are enthusiastic, who are promoters of observability, quite often are not the people you need to persuade to change.
Yeah. Switching a little bit, 5 minutes. I want to talk a little bit about like mixed environments. You have, of course, a lot of signals coming from hotel collectors, from the one agent, from different platforms. How did you manage that? Because no one comes to the table being just vanilla, and then there's a lot of complexity to it.
No, absolutely. I spend a lot of time talking about our previous logs piece. We also had a previous observability platform provided by another vendor, and we'd gone down a strongly OTel opinionated route with that implementation. OTel was spread out across all of our back-end services. Conversely, our front-end services had no form of observability coverage aside from the logging piece. What we really wanted was a full end-to-end experience, and what we learned on our journey is that with everything there is a compromise. Our strongly OTel opinionated pattern was great for providing a standardized interface across all of our back-end services. But when we started trying to connect front-end user actions through to the back-end ecosystem, staying pure OTel in that back-end ecosystem, we were losing as much as we were gaining. So for us, we have just been through our first peak period on Dynatrace. We know we have more work to do, and I think that work will be moving towards a position where at least our first layer of services behind our front ends are natively implemented with Dynatrace One Agent, because we believe, although that will compromise our singular OTel everywhere vision, we will get a better experience and more value from the Dynatrace platform.
Yeah, and speaking of distributed or tool sprawl, have a lot of different ones. How do you, I would assume that everybody in the audience uses probably more than one observability provider. How do you actually make that unified or unifying observability possible? Maybe for you, John.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, most companies do have a lot of observability tools and vendors out there. It does range across the board. I think a lot of the time it is that focus on your initial areas or initial places of focus where you can get the most amount of value, and then expanding from there. Because I think what you end up seeing a lot of is that it's not just the quality of each vendor or each tool that's necessarily the issue. Quite often it is the siloed nature of that data, which is an even bigger issue. The fact that each team has their own tool, their own source of truth, means that you end up with this whole finger pointing and war rooms that are taking place. And bringing that together is one key part of that, I think. And so even if that information is coming from different areas, that's why I'd say a lot of the time, if you can focus on the applications, the teams where you can get the most amount of value quickly, it can then expand and sort of grow very quickly from that, because you can then start to bring in the various different tools from various different teams and grow from that. Rather than taking one layer, like logs as an example across the board. Of course, that can be value from a licensing replacement perspective and cost savings on that front. But of course, if you can, take everything within a particular team, all the different telemetry data together, you will get significantly more value than taking one data type across the board.
Yeah, and I mean, I see this from my perspective as well. Like the number of customers that come to AWS and say, we have so many different vendors, how do we figure this out? Can you help us consolidate of one? Which one do you recommend? Like that's a really kind of top of mind for a lot of customers. What about automation? There's a lot of capability that Dynatrace brings to the table. Were you able to sort of walk the whole 9 yards with automated workflows?
It's a journey we've certainly started. So when I talked through our technology stack, I failed to mention the elephant in the room. We do have a little bit of Kubernetes. We use Kubernetes specifically for our AI workloads. And this is more traditional AI, where we're using our own models and we're running on our own EKS clusters, the actual computation around those models. We have a set of challenges around that. We scale up and down quite quickly as an organization. And when you're running on GPU-bound hardware, we were finding that scaling up and down with the base set of Kubernetes metrics was not effective. The boot-up time was just too long. EKS has a fantastic feature called warm pools, which allows you to solve this problem. But equally, we didn't want a load of spare G5 instances sat around twiddling their thumbs because they're not the cheapest thing in the world. Dynatrace helped us solve this by predictively saying we can see pressure on your NVIDIA drivers is looking like this. You're getting to the point where you're going to need to scale soon. I will add one node into the warm pool, and that can then be elegantly scaled up onto without a long delay.
Got it. Anything to add?
I mean, we're basically out of time. But yeah, I mean, overall, there obviously is a lot of potential there, and I think it is, as with Alex and the Storio Group, it is quite often that staged approach. You do often start with certain scenarios, certain areas where you can see easy value, and then grow it out over time as things evolve, and as, of course, everybody gets behind it and gets involved in that, and then automates and gets a lot more value.
Awesome. There was you were emphatically raising your hand. If you can scream really loudly.